PEGI 18.
Przynieście nam ich krew.
Jak myśmy wpadli w to bagno?
Do tyłu!
Pożyw się tym!
Jasna cholera! Podnieś mnie na dach, szybko!
Dziękuję, Leila! Obyś miał jakiś plan, Jacob!
Nie spudłować.
To było nawet fajne.
Welcome to Redfall. Redfall is our effort to take what Arkane does well, a hybrid of first-person games and RPGs, and stretch ourselves a little bit. Does this work in the open world? Does it work both solo and with co-op players? Can we take all our narrative layers and our improvisational mechanics and our style and spread that out across an open world?
For me, Redfall represents our most ambitious title that we've tried to do here in the Austin studio ever. It was super important for us to, let players still play by themselves and have that sort of like immersive Arkane experience, but then adding up to three other players into the mix, of course, changes everything. Not only from the player experience standpoint, but just from the development standpoint also. The reason I like making the kind of games that we make is because I like playing these kind of games, right? And so it's the same reason I like tabletop RPGs too. And it's the allure of I want to witness and then mess with some dramatic scene. I want to come upon these tableaus and sort of almost ant farm like see what's going on, hear what they're saying, try to suss out what they're doing, and then I want to jack with it in some way, to turn the vampire loose on them, or put explosives down, or snipe them from a distance, or see some cultist fortress real far away and try to figure out how am I going to get in there, what am I going to find when I get in there, that kind of stuff is super enticing to me.
Some of my favorite moments are just sort of observation about how the world changes, the way we spawn different little vignettes across the world, and you catch people at different points on their patrol route, and day-night changes things, and that's a powerful piece to me. Is wow, I feel like I'm in a living world.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the setting of the town of Redfall. It's like a lot of games you think it's not New York, it's not London or Boston or whatever. It's quaint, it's small. Even though it's our biggest game, it feels like small town Americana. And to your point, Harvey, with the time of day, that you can run through this open world so many different times, but based on the time of day, based on different weather, if the fog has rolled in, it can feel so dramatically different each time. And with the random spawning, you're constantly on your toes and in awe of some of the ways that the world looks.
I really gravitated toward a lot of the narrative that's in the world. The readables and getting just caught up and just I'm going to read this thing now, or walking through the Ford encampment and seeing a framed newspaper and then getting close and realizing the full story is actually there.
It's something that makes sense.
Yeah, and then you turn around and that person they're talking about is in this picture frame behind us. That and the forcing myself to take different approaches. I specifically remember kind of going through, and I have my one way I go for the first mission every time. This is the way I go, across this bridge, go up there. Watching somebody else go down into the lake bed, and there's a cave there that I had no idea. It just completely blew my mind.
Under the choppers crash? Yeah.
I was even thinking as I was watching, they're going the wrong way. That's not how you go. But it kind of changed how I approach everything now, where I feel like I have the way that I think about, and then I'm actually going to go this way this time, and it feels compelling to do that. So, yeah.
If I could add anything to that, or if I could put it into one word, it would probably be transported. We put so much effort into the narrative, into the world building, environmental storytelling, all that stuff and it's part of the reason the games that I gravitate towards make me feel that way, So I hope players feel like they've been transported to some place that feels real at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's that moment in time that you feel these people have existing relationships that you're kind of being a part of. They're not just people just happen to pop up, randomly.
Yep.
And one word we've used for this game throughout the whole time is spooky. We're not a horror game, so I hope there's not jump scares per se, right? There may have been
mimics.
a few. Yeah, I was if there's been a few in Prey. But so I hope people feel they can take the time to explore, but there is still that edge that there could be anything right around the corner. So you're not necessarily standing up in your seat from fear, but hopefully there's that little bit of spooky element that you just never know what you're going to encounter.
The story of Redfall begins with this idea that these like really smart, wealthy biotech entrepreneurs came to the island. They weren't from the island originally. They bought up some property and they started doing some research into like longevity experiments and life extension and things like that. Probably seen stuff like that in the news recently with people doing weird stuff with biotech startups. And that, you know, started to go south really quickly, get a little like morally questionable, you know, without giving spoilers away. The end result was they turned themselves into vampires. And one of the distinctives about our game is that the vampires in our game and the vampirism that they have is not, it's not a disease, it's not an accident, it's not something that you can cure. It's not like, oops, I got a cold and let me take this medicine and get rid of it and now I'm back to my normal kind self or whatever. The people who became vampires and the people who become vampires in our game, in a sense, they already were vampires on the inside, right? It's more like a metamorphosis, not a disease that they caught. And so it's definitely this like horrible evil that's like taken hold of the island that needs to be resisted and fought. They're not innocent people that you're trying to save. And they slowly, like a frog boiling in water, they slowly took over the town and consolidated all the power. And that's where players find themselves now at the beginning of the game.
We wanted to do something that was recognizable as vampires, but also a fresh take, or a less common take. So, you know, if they don't have fangs and they're not afraid of the sun and they don't drink blood, then they're not vampires. They have to have those elements to be vampires, basically. But we wanted our vampires to be derived from science. But we wanted to avoid the crosses, garlic, running water kind of stuff in lieu of like, these are vampires that wanted this to happen to them. They wanted to live forever, even at the expense of other people, even if it requires the blood of others. They're horrible monsters.
None of them are romantic interests or, you know, aspirational.
Well,
you know?
they are.
I mean, maybe you're into
they're
them.
Like they're beautiful. Most of them are beautiful. They're aspirational. It's like what they envision themselves, that they're just they're great.
It's like their own ideal self,
They're
which is
manifesting fancy clothes, and you know they're stylish. It's like what they themselves envision themselves as.
Idealized predators, yeah. And people who play the game will see the ecology of the sort of bootlicking cultists that follow them, that want to be made vampires, and you know, the humans that have been converted, the vampires can modify them in different ways. Not all of them become vampires. Nothing as grandiose as that. Some of them become like different types of familiars that are part of the gameplay ecology, all the way up to the vampires, and then sort of like specialized versions, named versions, like the vampire underbosses and things like that. And then we have a series of vampire gods, which are the most twisted, most changed by the whole process. And those serve as sort of chapter breakpoints across the game.
And the vampire gods are like they have the most power. They're the ones trapping you on the island, right? They've pushed the waters back. They're the ones that have blacked out the sun. They're tremendously powerful.
I really latched onto the idea of them being dangerous people regardless. Kind of like you were saying, like they're irredeemable in that they're just being unleashed, and you know, you're showing their true self at this point, right? For me, the cultists gave me a really nice view into the vampires, because you know, we were talking about how they've already kind of become their worst self. But I think through some of the conversations with the cultists, you get to discover what that actually means, and just how horrible you have to be to even just get to that point. So yeah, and then you could still end up not being a vampire at the end of the day. So, which is in some ways showing the mirror of how they are really awful, because they may not still turn you into the vampire.
Yeah, like Harvey touched on this a little bit a second ago, but like the vampires, you know, first of all, the cultist has to want to become a vampire, and then the vampires have to share some of their blood with them. And so like, you know, so I always picture that like some of the cultists are like, I hope I get turned into like a really badass vampire and then I can do whatever I want. But the vampires can choose instead to turn them into these other horrible things. Like one of them is called a blood bag, which is just like this grotesque creature that it's like a vampiric version of a milk cow, but it just produces like excess, you know, bloated amounts of blood for the vampires to to sip on whenever they're a little thirsty.
But I love that the writing for the blood bags is that they exalt in it. They love
Right.
it. You know, like,
Look at me, I'm gorgeous. Yeah.
Right.
The 4 heroes that you get to pick from to play, we deliberately, we set out to say some of them are from the island, some of them are outsiders coming into the island, so you have multiple perspectives. And they represent this like spectrum of like different backgrounds, different play styles. Like, if you're, like I gravitate towards Jacob, who is like probably more stealth oriented because he's got the ability to turn invisible, he's kind of got sniper type skills, he's got a raven that can scout for him. And all the way on the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody super wacky like Devinder, who's like got a bunch of crazy gadgets that allow him to do bizarre things like, plant javelins in the ground that spark lightning everywhere or teleport around. Or he has a blacklight power that lets him freeze everyone. So he's got a lot of like area of effect abilities, and personality-wise, he's just like, he's just super gregarious and interesting and just like zany character. He's internet famous, cryptid hunter. So I think there's like, with the 4 heroes, there's a little bit of something for everyone. Depending on what your playstyle is and what kind of you gravitate towards in terms of like personality.
Yeah, and the funny thing about Devinder is I think he actually wants to be on the island to be researching what's happening.
Yeah, that's true. He's happy that, at some level, he's happy that something crazy like this is happening because it validates his like theories or whatever.
I think it's also fun to think about who and why are they on the island. Like Layla was living here, she was a college student. Devinder was here for a book signing, right? Lucky him to actually have some content to capture. Remy, from some of the tricklings of some weirdness happening, she's here because of her search and rescue skill set. And Jacob initially with Bellwether, so.
Jacob was one of the bad guys.
Yeah. So to really think about really different reasons for these characters to be here on the island and then build up from that was fun as well.
I think something I struggled with initially, but I've come to really appreciate, is that they're not a kit. This isn't just, this is the tank and then this is the healer and this is this. There's so much nuance to how you play each of these characters. Like, Devinder, it would be real easy just to say he's the gadget guy, but that doesn't really encapsulate everything that he can do. He has a little bit of crowd control, a little bit of traversal, and then like a big AoE, versus like Remy has Brabant with her, and that kind of has a lot going on there, but then also has her sticky bomb, and like that's really given me a lot of like joy to kind of discover how I want to play these characters and beyond just like the high level summary of them.
So as you're playing through the game, of course there are we've come up with a suite of like really cool abilities and powers for players to choose from, just like we did in Prey and Dishonored. You have tons of options, and if you happen to be playing as like if we all decide to play Layla's or Jacob's, my Jacob might not be the same as yours because I may choose to like really drill down into the Raven skill tree and like max that out before I pick any of the other skills. So you got a lot of choice there to like express different play styles. That's the skill trees, but then of course you've also got your gear. Like we've got special things called remnants you can find, which are like basically magical vampire blood that you can equip almost as like a talisman that will give you special resistances or special abilities related to healing, but it also boosts your health. So there's lots of different ways that you can sort of customize your character's build. Yeah,
and there's also ways for your friends to, if you've leveled up certain skills to a certain point, that your friends get to benefit from them. Yeah. Like if you're playing Jacob and you level up Cloak to a certain point, I actually can cloak as well.
Yes. We tried to not make it so that like this skill only works in multiplayer, or this skill only is useful in single player, but it has the single player benefit, but then it has the multiplayer like add, and if you happen to be playing with friends, it does cool stuff for your friends too, which I think is going to be super fun.
I saw it as like in a horde shooter, like they're coming for you at all times, so you feel that pressure, and in this game I feel like I'm the danger kind of thing, right? I'm the one who's moving through.
You're trapped in the room with me.
Yeah.
It's also important, that's a great point, and it's important to note that like they're unaware of you. So you can zoom in and eavesdrop on their conversations. You can sneak up and listen to two people talk and then slip away from the encounter. You know, it shares the lineage of Arkane games in that sense.
Yeah, that's something that's also been nice about the vampires being the antagonists, is that they're not mindless. They're not just let me run and eat your brain, right? So they're actually thoughtful. They are a bit more of a predator, and also humans are terrifying, right? So the cultists and Bellwether are they're also more tactical. So yeah, they take cover, you know, they flank you, all those good things.
Well, the other thing is, like, this is an open world game. You're never trapped in, like, I'm not trapped in this alley and I have to defeat 30, you know.
Just gotta hold out.
Yeah, I don't have to hold out. Like, I can do the thing that I do in other open world games, which is like, this monster's too hard, I'm leaving. And I'm gonna go fight these other monsters over here, get a new weapon, level up, and then I'm gonna come back and kick this guy's ass.
When we started Redfall, we knew we needed, like, you know, guns, because this is part RPG, part shooter. And it was fun to be able to work with modern guns for once. And, you know, we wanted a range from, like, high-end military gear dropped by Bellwether security on the island, all the way down to, like, Grandpa's shotgun found in the attic of this old Victorian house. And then some kit bash stuff too, like in his garage, this person made, like, you know, a duct tape handgun that, you know, has a flashlight on it or something, right? So there's ranging from jury rig to high-end military and all that. But very quickly we realized we also needed some vampire-specific weapons. And so the UV beam, which leads to a whole system of petrifying the vampires, from which they can thaw out if you don't stake them. The stake launcher itself, which is like a found ammo type weapon, like broken off pool cues and snapped off mop handles and fireplace pokers and things like that.
Steak knives.
Yeah, and then like flare guns, which you'd find on a tourist island with sailboats and all. They immolate vampires, and so they become like a little fireball launcher. And so the usual weapons that you love in games, sniper rifles and shotguns and assault rifles and things like that, are fun to play with in our game. And they level up over time, and they have different traits on them, and so you're looking for the one with the right traits that you want.
And they have stakes on the end, of course, because you need to be able to stake vampires.
Right, again, every time we tweak our fiction in some way, like vampires, it leads to whole systems like staking and petrification with UV light and all that. But in addition to all those guns, we have the set of vampire-specific guns that are you know, unique to the game.
The best stake attachment in the game is the garden gnome.
You don't like the broken guitar neck?
Oh, the broken guitar neck. I'm partial to the harpoon. It looks like a whaling harpoon that's been cut off and put on the end of the rifle. So.
We start with something really weird and fantastic, right? Like Dunwall or Space Station. And then we work to make it so that players can understand the space and learn about the environment. But this time we started with something familiar on purpose. Like, everybody gets, like, a small town, you know, on the East Coast. Everybody understands liquor stores and convenience stores and clinics and neighborhoods. So that part is awesome because you're immediately dropped into something you understand. But then the part that I like is then we twist it, right? The vampires, they warp reality around them with their psychic abilities. So the cultists, of course, build weird structures on top of the familiar settings that you'll encounter occasionally, and then the vampires, like, punch these holes through reality and make these little pocket dimensions where they, like, sleep and gather power. And those spaces are some of my favorite because everything's just, like, bent and twisted into this, like, sort of Halloween/nightmare version of reality.
And speaking to the size, I think the Talos and Prey was 5 football fields. And the size of Redfall is kind of hold my beer on that one. So we definitely challenged the whole team with making something this big.
Yeah.
I remember early on there was a moment we were working on District 2, which is a little more rural, and Jim McGill took Talos at scale and dropped it in the middle of the farm that's there. And the district just eats the whole space station, of course. It's gigantic.
It was just the size of the actual, like, farm area.
Yeah.
And that's just, like, one mission.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Ultimately, we hope that players will play single player if that's what they want, and it will feel like an Arkane game. But it's more expansive. It's an open world, but it's not an open world based on the scale of vehicles. It's an open world based on foot. And so it's like a familiar setting, New England, spooky, traverse the place, go into mom and pop grocery stores, apartments, get on the roof of buildings. And we try to put as many environmental storytelling scenes around as we possibly can. And so it just feels very lived in.
I think the thing that's compelling to me about the open world, and this is true in other open world games that I love, but it's just like how easily the player can get distracted, you know, with like some other wondrous thing or some interesting point of interest. Like you always set out with like, I have this goal in mind. I'm going, you know, to the shipyard or the farm to rescue this person or collect this thing. That's my mission. But like it takes me 2 hours to get there because along the way, like a nest popped up, or I saw a vignette with some like cultists who were harassing some civilians that are tied up, or I got ambushed by vampires, you know, or an NPC gave me a little side mission to go check out. There's always something along the way that just like pulls me off the beaten path to check something out or discover something or loot something, and that's just tremendously fun.
I'm thankful every day for, like, Arkane is a company where some of us have worked together for 20 plus years or 10 years, or, you know, and there's a lot of cement there socially and a lot of creative chemistry, and even though some people have left and new people have joined us and all that, it's been a blessing to have this team and this game and the company culture, and we're in it together. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna ship our game no matter what, no matter what virus hits us or whatever, you know, so. But during this last few years, it's been a blessing.